What's up, and welcome back to another episode of DNR Sports. I am your host, Richie, and today I'm giving you guys my top 8 plus a little bit extra fantasy-relevant rookie wide receivers for the 2021 fantasy football season. If you've seen the other videos that I've posted with the relevant rookies, you'll know that I talk a little bit about their strengths and their skills as players, but because I have so many players on this list, I'm going to cut that part out for this video. I'm gonna talk about their situation, offensive pieces, and what my concerns are for each player and what could limit them and their fantasy production. With that being said, I'm gonna start with my favorite, my number one relevant rookie wide receiver for this class, and I have Jamar Chase, wide receiver out of LSU. He's now on the Cincinnati Bengals. I thought this was a great pairing. Back in 2019 in college football, Joe Burrow threw 60 touchdowns in a season, 20 of which went to Jamar Chase. So I do believe coming out the gate, they're going to have a great connection. He was the 5th overall selection in this draft for good reason. He was the number 1 wide receiver on most people's boards, and he has a ton of talent, a ton of upside. One of my problems for this team, and you can see on the bottom, my main concern for this offense and for this player is actually their offensive line. Their offensive line ranked 31st at the end of last season, according to PFF, which was obviously out of 32 teams, the second worst team. Also, their team pass block win rate was 50%, which was 29th according to ESPN. So, not great. They didn't do a ton to upgrade this offensive line this season. They have Jonah Williams returning. He's going to slowly get better as a player, who was a first-round selection in the 2019 draft. They also drafted 2 linemen in the top 4 rounds, and Jackson Carman in the 2nd, and Devante Smith in the 4th. Again, not a great offensive line. I think their ceiling as a unit is probably middle of the pack, but I think that's looking optimistically. I still do think that this team is going to have problems protecting Burrow, and they're probably not going to want to have him throw so many times a game. But I don't think production and targets are going to be a problem for Chase. I do think he will get a ton of looks this season. So obviously, if you look at their offensive pieces, they have Joe Burrow at quarterback. They have Joe Mixon at running back. In my opinion, I believe Jamar Chase is the one for this team, or at least he will be the one when the season starts. So as my wide receiver 2 for this team, I have Tyler Boyd, an excellent slot guy. And wide receiver 3, I have T. Higgins, second-year player out of Clemson. And then for tight end, there's a few guys here that I think you can put here, but I have Drew Sample. So I don't think targets are going to be an issue for Jamar Chase. I think the O-line could be a problem. Their defense also isn't great, so I think they could be trailing in a lot of games, which could create more opportunity for Chase. My only problem is for Burrow, and I'm not sure he won't last the whole season playing the way they did last season. I hope they can change their offense a little bit, make it more quick-hitting. But I like Jamar Chase as a player. He was many scouts and analysts number 1 ranked wide receiver coming out of this class. So I think he has all the talent in the world. It's just going to be, can the O-line give Joe Burrow enough time to throw the ball to Chase? We'll see. But as far as right now, I do have Jamar Chase as my number 1 fantasy wide receiver as a rookie. Coming in at number 2, my second favorite wide receiver as a rookie in terms of fantasy is Devante Smith out of Alabama. He went to Philly in the 10th overall pick in this past draft. They traded with Dallas to get the 10th pick to select him. He's got a ton of talent. Size isn't an issue for me. Obviously, co-host of this show, Adam, is an Eagles fan, and he tells me a bunch of information about the team. And he told me that Devante Smith hasn't taken a huge hit since high school, and he's actually learned to not take big hits and to try to contort his body and look out for stuff. So that's promising to hear, considering people had some size issues about him. But if we go, to the offense and to the pieces around him, they had the 10th best O-line according to PFF at the end of last season. They also had a 60% team pass block win rate, which was 11th according to ESPN. So a very solid O-line. And you have to remember that was without their star right guard, Brandon Brooks, who missed the whole season due to injury. So I do think they're going to have a really solid offensive line this year, especially if you can if you count Landon Dickerson, the guard, also out of Alabama, they drafted at the top of the second round. He does have some injury concerns, which could keep him out of the starting lineup. But if he can get healthy and make the lineup and start, I think he could be a very solid player, especially after Jason Kelce retires. But for now, I think he could be a plug-and-play right guard for this team. Honestly, when you look at their offense, it's pretty solid on paper. Obviously, they have Jalen Hurts, who's coming into his second year, so we'll see how he can progress as a quarterback. Learning a new system, it might be a little rough for Hurts coming into it, but they also have Miles Sanders and a few other running backs here, like newly signed running back Kerryon Johnson from Detroit. According to their depth chart, Devonte Smith is a starting slot receiver, which I could actually see him playing. So, but I also see him as a wide receiver 1. Wide receiver 2, I have as Jalen Reagor, and wide receiver 3, I have Travis Fogum, who was benched after showing a ton of promise last season. I think that was more due to the coaching staff's inabilities and trying to play the older guys on bigger contracts to get the most out of paying these players. But I think Fogum is very solid, and I think he could have a decent fantasy season this year. And even if not that, he could just be a solid contributor. Also, I have starting tight end as Dallas Goddard, because I do believe that Zach Ertz will not be on the team by the time that the season rolls around. So a ton of good players here, which could actually help Devonte Smith and maybe not have him get double covered or have as many looks from the defense as maybe other players on this list. But again, my main concern is actually going to be Jalen Hurts in the new system. They hired head coach Nick Sirianni from the Colts, so it might be a little bit of a rough start for this team because it's a rookie head coach. Still not a completely full normal off season, you could say. So it could be a little bit worse, a little bit of a tough start for this team. Also, their team production, I'm not sure how this team's going to play. Most people project them to be in the cellar of the NFC East, and this is a weak NFC East, and I actually agree with that. So we'll see what happens with this team. They might just be overall kind of unimpressive. They might play some teams close. I could definitely see that because their defense, as I'm looking right here, is actually pretty solid all around. Their D-line's always been a strength for their team, and that's always, the key to having a solid defense is pressure and stopping the run. So I think they could actually keep games close, and this might actually limit Devonte Smith's production. But as a player, I think he's got all the upside in the world. One of the best route runners in the draft. And I have him as my second favorite fantasy rookie wide receiver. Now going to number 3, my third favorite fantasy rookie wide receiver is Amon-Ra St. Brown from USC. He went to Detroit in the top of the 4th round, so 112th overall. I actually thought this was a pretty solid player. I think he went a little bit later in this draft due to the depth and the number of good receivers in this draft. With that being said, we're going to take a look at the Lions offense, which actually could probably not be all that good this year, but we'll take a look. So their offensive line last year ranked 16 according to PFF at the end of last season, and they had a 55% team pass block win rate according to ESPN, which was 20th among 32 teams. So obviously it wasn't great. A car just honked. Which obviously wasn't great, but I do think they did a really good job of upgrading their offensive line this year. They drafted Penei Sewell in the 7th overall selection of the draft, which I thought was a great value for a player who could have even gone as early as number 4 to the Falcons. So as a whole, I think their offensive line is very solid. And obviously, if you look at their offense, they have a quarterback Jared Goff, who the writing's still on the wall for him. We're not really sure what he's going to do. They have running back DeAndre Swift, who I think they could probably run the offense through. According to the depth chart on our lads, they don't have St. Brown as the starting wide receiver, but I do think he will be able to win that job come regular season. So my wide receiver 2 for this team is Brashad Perriman, and my wide receiver 3 is Tyrell Williams, but we'll see about Williams. I'm not really sure about him yet. And of course, the tight end, everyone knows him, TJ Hawkinson. The main concern I have for this team, and I think we talked about it a little bit in the Hawkinson video that we did, is that the offense is probably going to be pretty inconsistent. I don't see this being a great fantasy team. Their defense, we're not really sure about yet. I think it's probably going to be pretty underwhelming, I'll say. So they could be trailing in a lot of games, which could actually help Amon-Ra St. Brown in this offense. Get a little bit more targets, a little bit more production, but as a whole, I think this team's going to be really bad. I don't see their offense being any more than bottom 5 unit in the league. So that could really hurt St. Brown's production. But I do have him as my wide receiver 3 because it's really hard to not have a player who is going to potentially be the wide receiver 1 for their team, as like not on the radar for fantasy production. So coming in at number 4, I have Terrace Marshall Jr. out of LSU. He went to Carolina in the bottom of the second round, 59th overall selection. I think he's a really solid outside guy. I think he helps in the red zone. I think he could have a few touchdowns this season, which could be really good for his fantasy production. In terms of the team around him, Carolina had the 17th ranked offensive line according to PFF. They had a 53% team pass block win rate, which was 23rd according to ESPN. So not great. The reason why I include the pass block win rate and the offensive line rank in general is because some teams like Carolina have a better run blocking team or offensive line than a pass blocking. So I like to add both to show that maybe they're a little bit lackluster in the pass blocking department. But I think they did a pretty solid job of adding some pieces that could help contribute right away. They added Devante Brown in the 6th round of the draft. They added Brady Christensen in the 3rd round of the draft. That was a guard and a tackle, respectively. So, and in general, I think they do have some decent role players here. No one that really stands out. That's a great player. But I think if everyone does their job and plays solidly along the offensive line, I think they could probably have about middle of the road, a little bit higher. Of a unit this year. They also have a swing tackle and a swing guard in Cameron Irving and John Miller. As far as the rest of the offense goes, they have newly acquired Sam Darnold from the Jets. They have Christian McCaffrey, who had a few injuries last season that derailed his year, but I do think he can come back and be very solid. You even saw last year in the games that he did play, he put up, I think, minimum 24 fantasy points in the 2 or 3 contests that he did participate in. So obviously he's a monster, and you can always expect something from CMC. I do think Marshall, by the time the season starts, will be the wide receiver 3, and I believe that Our Lads has him ranked there right now. So obviously the wide receiver 1 on this team is DJ Moore. Wide receiver 2 is Robbie Anderson. Maybe you see them reversed. That's how I have it for right now. And the tight end I have starting is Dan Arnold, but of course there could be a ton of guys here like Ian Thomas also, or Tommy Tremble, who they drafted in the 3rd round of this year's draft. Now on to main concerns for Terrace Marshall. I do think he's going to be the wide receiver 3/4 for this team. They did sign David Moore out of Seattle, who was a very solid role player for that team. He always came in kind of clutch and had a few touchdowns in the seasons that he played with Seattle. So I think that could maybe take away from Marshall's production a little bit. But as we saw last year from Curtis Samuel actually had some fantasy relevance, and he at points was a wide receiver 3/2 for fantasy teams. So I do believe that Terrace Marshall can come in and be like a Curtis Samuel. They're not really similar in the type of player that they are, but in terms of production and getting targets and getting red zone production, I do think Marshall can come in and make some fantasy relevance here, and that's why I have him as my wide receiver 4. Coming in at my wide receiver 5, I have Amari Rodgers out of Clemson, and he is now on the Green Bay Packers. They drafted him in the 3rd round of the 2021 draft. He was the 85th overall selection. I think he's a really good slot guy. He kind of reminds me of Randall Cobb a little bit, and I think he could play a Cobb-like role for this team. The offense is really not a problem for me. Obviously, if you look at the stats, PFF graded them as the 4th best offensive line in the league last season, and they had the 1st-ranked team pass block win percentage with 74%, according to ESPN. So the offense is really good. Obviously, they have Aaron Rodgers, former reigning MVP. They also re-signed Aaron Jones to a 4-year contract. Obviously, Davante Adams is going to be the wide receiver 1. He is the guy for this offense. He's a phenomenal player. Wide receiver 2, they have Allen Lazard, who is more of a role player. I could definitely see him or maybe Marquez Valdes-Scantling battling for that wide receiver 2 job. And obviously, they have Robert Tonyan at tight end, who could come in and have some red zone production as he did last year, kind of a breakout player. My main concern for Amari Rodgers, as Our Lads list him as the starting slot receiver, is going to be some playing time. I do think they have some other players here, like I said, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Allen Lazard, Equinemius St. Brown, brother of Amon-Ra St. Brown that I talked about a little bit before. And also they have Devin Funchess returning from, I guess, the COVID list, or he took the year off because of COVID. So he could actually have some fantasy production as well, taking some snaps away from Rodgers. But my main concern for Rodgers is that Aaron Rodgers has shown in the past that if you're not cut up to speed, if you're not familiar with the playbook and you're making some mistakes and you're not doing what he needs you to do, he will straight up not throw you the ball. He will eliminate you from the offensive plan until you learn, I guess it's kind of tough parenting, but it worked for some other players like Davante Adams and Allen Lazard. So that kind of scares me a little bit. Rodgers' trust with young wide receivers is non-existent. So we'll see what happens with that. But if Amari Rodgers, the wide receiver, can come out and can do the things that Aaron Rodgers needs him to do, then I do believe that he can actually be a very solid fantasy wide receiver. Coming off a 48 touchdown year from Aaron Rodgers, I think there's a lot of production to go around, especially in the red zone, and that could help Amari Rodgers' production as a receiver. I do think he has one of the lowest floors out of all these receivers that I'm going to mention today, but I think he has top 2 upside, so top 2 ceiling out of any of these receivers, up there with Jamar Chase. So with that being said, coming in at number 6, I have Josh Palmer, wide receiver out of Tennessee, who is now on the Los Angeles Chargers. He was drafted in the 3rd round, the 77th overall selection. He's immediately listed as the wide receiver 3 for this team for good reason. I think he was very solid. I think quarterback play limited him a little bit in Tennessee, so I think he's a better player than most people realize. And I think this team as a whole is actually going to be very solid this season. Last year, they had the 30th ranked offensive line according to Pro Football Focus, and they had a 47% team pass block win rate, which is 31st according to ESPN. So obviously not great, but they did make a few acquisitions on the offensive line. They drafted Rashawn Slater in the 1st round, who was a steal for where they were picking. Definitely a player with top 10 prospect upside. They also signed Corey Linsley from Green Bay and a few other guards from free agency. So I think their offensive line is going to be a lot more upgraded. It's going to be better this season, especially with new head coach Brandon Staley running the helm. I think Staley's going to bring more excitement and a better offense to this team. He definitely can't be as bad as Anthony Lynn, because I think Anthony Lynn was right up there with Adam Gase in terms of worst head coaches in the league. They lost, I think it was about 9 games by 1 score or less, which always seems to be a Charger thing to do. So if they can just turn that around, I think they can definitely have a very solid offense, and that could actually help Josh Palmer. Obviously, you can see by their offensive pieces, they have reigning Rookie of the Year Justin Herbert, running back Austin Eckler, who's a very solid pass catcher. He can make a name for himself and already has. According to me, their number 1 wide receiver is Keenan Allen, and their number 2 wide receiver is Mike Williams. And their starting tight end is going to be Jared Cook, and I'm sure Trey McKitty is probably going to get in there a little bit, their 3rd round tight end selection. My main concerns for Josh Palmer are going to be that he is the wide receiver 3 for this team, so that could hurt him a little bit in terms of total targets and how many touches he can have with the ball. Also, I think people aren't really talking about this enough. I think we could probably see a little bit of Justin Herbert regression this season. He obviously broke the rookie passing touchdown record last season, so we'll see what he can do this season. If he can hit 30 again, I think that's really good for their whole offense, and I do believe that that could go up with his new head coach, but I could also see it going down. We'll have to see how the offensive line comes together, because that's going to be the main reason to Herbert's success, in my opinion. Can the offensive line come together? Because I think their defense is very solid. I think he can keep him close in games. I could definitely see Herbert playing a little bit worse in terms of stat-wise. His stats can go down. But I do think that the defense will play better, and they might win a few more games and actually make themselves contenders in the AFC. But for Josh Palmer, I do think that he's a very solid wide receiver. I think he can come in, make some plays. He might get subbed out a little bit for Jalen Guyton, but other than that, I think Palmer could be a solid fantasy rookie wide receiver this year. Coming in at number 7, I have Diamy Brown out of UNC, wide receiver, obviously. He went to the Washington football team in the 3rd round, and he was the 82nd overall pick. When I was first making this list, I actually had him as my wide receiver 3 out of all these wide receivers, but after taking a look at the depth chart and really like looking into the Redskins offense, I didn't love what I was seeing. Woo! Excuse me. So right off the bat, their offensive line rank last season was 29th according to PFF, and this was something where the overall stat didn't really show their pass blocking, how their pass blocking was last year. So they had a 59% team pass block win rate last season, which was 14th according to ESPN. So obviously their pass blocking was a lot better than their run blocking. So I think that could help Diamy Brown a little bit. Their key offensive pieces this year are Ryan Fitzpatrick, Antonio Gibson. Obviously, Fitzpatrick, should have said this prior, but Fitzpatrick just came from Miami. Antonio Gibson. They also have their running back, J.D. McKissick. The wide receiver 1 is Terry McLaurin. According to me, their wide receiver 2 is former Panther Curtis Samuel. And their starting tight end is Logan Thomas. So they made a few decent offseason acquisitions here. They signed Charles Leno from the Bears to play left tackle. They traded for Eric Flowers, who was formerly on the Giants, then the football team, Miami, and then back to the football team now. They have another very solid offensive lineman, Brandon Sheriff, not signed, but he's been there. They also drafted Samuel Cosmi in the second round of the 2021 draft. So I do believe they have a few pieces here that can help with Brown's production. My only problem is going to be playing time for him. He is going to be the wide receiver 3/4. Currently, Arrowlads has him listed as the second slot receiver behind Curtis Samuel. They have Kelvin Harmon as the right wide receiver. But I do think Harmon and Brown are different players. Also, it kind of stinks that Washington signed Adam Humphries, who is also a decent slot receiver. So it'll be interesting to see how much time Diamy Brown can play. But I think if he can get playing time, I think he'd be a very solid player. Also, I'm not really sure what I'm getting from this offense. I know Ryan Fitzpatrick is a solid quarterback. So I think this could be his year. Especially, he loves to show out for his first year on new teams when there's no expectations for him, or maybe people think he's not going to be all that good. So this is usually the time when he shows out. So this could be really good for Brown. But at the same time, their defense is really good, which could keep them in games. So they might not have to win shootouts. So they might run the ball more with Gibson, or kind of play more conservatively. Which isn't really Fitzpatrick's game, but we'll see what Coach Rivera wants to do. But yeah, so just take it as you will. I did have him as the wide receiver 3 prior to looking a little bit more into it. So I do like him as a player. I do like him for this offense. It's just a question of how many snaps he can get, and then combined with how many targets he can get with those snaps. Now, coming in as my last definitive receiver prospect, I have Nico Collins out of Michigan. He went to the Houston Texans, and now this one's probably a little weird. I don't think many people are talking about Nico Collins. I think the main storyline with the Texans is Deshaun Watson and his allegations and whether he's going to play football at all. I don't really know much about Collins as a player, but I do know that Texans are kind of a dumpster fire right now. So I'll talk more about the team and then say why I picked him, put him on this list. So last season they had the 19th ranked offensive line according to PFF, with a 56% team pass block win rate, which was 19th according to ESPN. Obviously, if Deshaun Watson plays and he sticks with the Texans, I think that's going to boost everyone around them. I think that offense could actually still be pretty viable, in my opinion. But for now, Tyra Taylor is going to be the starter, at least in my projection. Despite the allegations, whether they're true or not, Watson did come out prior to all that and say he does not want to play for the Texans again, and he will sit out and not get paid essentially. So I do think that Deshaun's days in Houston are done. So I do think Tyra Taylor could be the starting quarterback. As I mentioned in a previous video, I think Davis Mills could come in, or they should give him a shot because he was their first overall quarterback selection in this draft in the 3rd round. I'd say quarterback selection, like selection in general, because their first pick was at the top of the 3rd round. But I do think Tyra Taylor is going to start as the quarterback for this team going into the season. They have a few running backs on roster, but their starter, according to Arrowlads, is David Johnson. They also signed Mark Ingram and Phillip Lindsay. According to me, their wide receiver 1 is Brandon Cooks. Their wide receiver 2 is Randall Cobb. And they have Nico Collins as the backup to Brandon Cooks at left wide receiver. But the right wide receiver for this depth chart is Andre Roberts, but he's more of a special teamer in my opinion. I don't think he'll have any real offensive snaps, nothing that could take away from Nico Collins. So I do think he can slot in there and be the starting wide receiver. Of course, my main concern is quarterback. Tyra Taylor, I don't think he can really produce any fantasy relevant wide receivers, players in general. I guess he could, but I think it'd be more of a Brandon Cooks. I don't think I mentioned it before, but Jordan Atkins potentially, or Brevin Jordan, rookie tight end, who I really love out of Miami, from the 5th round of the 2021 draft. Also, the offense is probably going to be pretty inconsistent. Not any really game-changing players here. Brandon Cooks is a very solid wide receiver. He bounces around from team to team and still does pretty well with each team that he plays in. But I think in general, this offense is pretty lackluster. Their offensive line, I do think, is a little bit better, so I think it could keep them in a little bit of games. But their defense as a whole is pretty bad, especially when you look at their D-line, arguably the most important part of the defense. It's pretty bad, so I do think they're going to be trailing a lot, which could actually help Nico Collins. It could be passing more than running. But my main thing with Nico Collins, and the reason why I actually added him on this list right at the end, is I do think that Houston will start off the season very terribly. I'm not sure exactly when their bye week is, but I could easily see them starting the season like 0-8 or maybe like 1-7, something like that, and then they go into their bye week and they blow it up, and they either cut or trade any expensive veterans that could hurt their cap space going forward. And I do think they could start maybe some of the young guys. I don't think head coach David Culley is a long-term guy as head coach. I think he's more of a stopgap type of hiring. So I don't see his job security being an issue for this organization. I think that he's just a guy for now until they can have a better coaching market. So I could definitely see them playing maybe Davis Mills later in the season with Nico Collins, and maybe get Collins, I don't know, anywhere from like 7 to 15 targets per game. So if you're willing to wait on this guy, who probably won't have any immediate fantasy production, keep him on your bench, or maybe keep an eye on him on the waiver wire for the whole season. I think he could be a very solid payoff player at the end of the year. But with that being said, those are my top 8 fantasy relevant rookie wide receivers, and I have a few other guys here that I like to add. I call this the other guys. So I said any wide receiver in round 1 or round 2. Because when you're taking a wide receiver that high, they clearly have potential and they have a reason to start for your team. A few guys I think of right away. Jalen Waddle, obviously out of Miami. I think he's going to be more of a role player. I do think he's a fantastic wide receiver. I would have loved for him to drop to the Giants at pick 11. Obviously, he went pick 6 to Miami. But I just don't think Tua will be able to make him a fantasy relevant wide receiver. Especially because they have Preston Williams and Devontae Parker there, along with Mike Gesicki, and they drafted another tight end. I think it's Hunter Long, I believe. So I don't see Waddle being a guy. I think he's going to be very solid with the touches he's given, but not, any type of real contributor to the fantasy wide receiver pool. There's also Kadarius Toney, who I think is more exciting than anything. Again, he's going to be a role player in a very crowded offensive group in the New York Giants. There's also Rashad Bateman, who I don't think is going to get a ton of looks because the offense is more centered around running and pounding the rock rather than airing it out with Lamar Jackson's arm. And then going to the second round, I was really close to adding Elijah Moore on this list, wide receiver out of Ole Miss, going to the Jets. But with a rookie head coach, with a rookie quarterback, I do think that this team's going to be more ground and pound. I know Saleh is a former defensive coordinator with the Niners, so I do believe they're going to try to make this team more defensive oriented, kind of like the old Jets team with Rex Ryan. Pound the rock, play good defense, and not ask too much of your rookie quarterback. And then there's also Rondo Moore, wide receiver out of Purdue, who went to the Arizona Cardinals. I just don't think, with all their weapons there on that offense, I don't think he'll get a ton of production or even a ton of time playing, to be honest with you, because they obviously have AJ Green who they signed from Cincinnati. They still have the beast Hopkins. They have Andy Isabella, who they drafted in the second round a few years back, and they have Christian Kirk. So it's a loaded wide receiver room. They have a lot of really good guys there, but I think playing time can be a problem for Rondo Moore. Now going to a few other guys that I have here that I picked up. If you notice, I didn't really pick anyone past the fifth round, because I think at that point it's kind of shot in the dark. Players that you think have high upside, but we're not really sure about. So if you're wondering why there's no fifth round wide receivers, that's the reason why. But starting off, I have Anthony Schwartz, who was the 28th pick in the third round. He went to the Cleveland Browns. I think the main thing for him is going to be playing time. I do like him as a player. I think he'd be very solid when he comes in, but he's going to be behind Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, Higgins. So I do think that he won't have a ton of playing time. Also, the offense is more centered around running the ball, pounding the rock with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. So again, I think he might be valuable for his role, what he does, but I don't think he'll have a ton of production. There's also Dez Fitzpatrick, who was the Tennessee Titans selection in the fourth round. I believe they traded up for him. I don't love him as a player. I thought he was overdrafted, especially with Amon-Ra St. Brown still on the board. But I have to add him here because I do believe that he could actually get some starting reps at wide receiver, because their wide receiving core and their weapons as a whole on that offense are diminished after this offseason because they weren't able to re-sign anybody. So just because of that, I think he can get some starting reps, but I don't love him as a player. And I'm actually not high on that offense at all because of the lack of weapons, because the defense got a little bit worse. I don't think they're going to be able to use the play action game as much because they're going to be trailing a little bit this season. So I do think it'll be a little bit hard for the offense, and that includes Dez Fitzpatrick. And then going to my final wide receiver on this entire list, I have Tylen Wallace, who was the 26th selection in the fourth round to Baltimore. He's just depth, in my opinion. I do like him as a player. I think if he went to any other team, I think he'd be good, but I think the main thing is the Baltimore system. It's going to be limiting him a little bit. Again, more running than passing. And, of course, they drafted Rashad Bateman in the first round, so I think that he's not going to get a ton of playing time, but again, I like him as a player. I think maybe he's like a deep sleeper. Maybe if he gets playing time, he could make something happen, but he's behind a few guys, like Sammy Watkins, who they just signed from free agency, Marquise Brown, Devin Duvernay, Miles Boykin. So, but yeah, with that being said, that was my entire list of relevant rookie wide receivers for the 2021 NFL fantasy football season. If you guys agree, let me know in the comments. If you guys disagree, let me know in the comments. If there's any players from your favorite team that I missed that I didn't talk about, make sure to drop it in the comments. I could definitely try to make another video if I get enough suggestions and enough input from everyone else. Be on the lookout for the next video coming from me. It's going to be relevant tight end rookies for the 2021 season. That's going to be a lot shorter of a list than the wide receivers, but be on the lookout. That should be coming in the following days. But with that being said, my name is Richie. You've watched DNR Sports. Thank you guys for sticking around. If you've made it to this part of the video, drop a thumbs up. We really appreciate it. Make sure you hit the subscribe button for more content, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.